Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, where we visit with leaders who are shaping, innovating, and disrupting technical education. People who are not afraid to think differently, not afraid to try something new, all with the goal of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. It is awesome to have everybody with us as we talk about disrupting the world of STEM and technical education. We do not live in a world that's standing still. We live in a world that is constantly changing. New technologies, new approaches to information, new approaches to data, new approaches to education. And so the folks that we love the most are the ones that are taking in the world as it comes to them and figuring out how we educate the next generation of talent. That is especially important when we are reaching into communities that maybe haven't had the same types of opportunities that others of us have had over the course of our education pathway. So today we are talking with someone who's an absolute disruptor, somebody who understands the total need for us to reach students that have maybe not had these opportunities in the past, understands the importance of meeting them with technology, with innovative education, with hands-on experiences, and so on. We are going to talk all about that today with Abby Andrietsch, and Abby is the Chief Executive Officer. We don't hear that title so often in education. We talk about principals, we talk about district administrators, we talk about superintendents. Abby is the Chief Executive Officer of what we call St. Augustine Preparatory Academy. And Abby, I want to thank you so much. You're in person in the studio. We're going to have a great conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Matt. I'm really happy to be here.
And we are so happy to have you. We are going to talk first about the educational landscape here in my hometown of Milwaukee. I grew up here in southeastern Wisconsin. Our listeners know that while we talk about national issues in education, we talk about national innovators in education, there's a huge soft spot in my heart for anybody who is trying to change and have a positive impact on the world of education here in southeastern Wisconsin. You're doing exactly that. But let's start out with the educational landscape for a young person growing up in and around the city of Milwaukee. How would you kind of describe the current state for that individual?
Yeah, Matt, that's a great question. When I stop and think about Milwaukee education, it's easy for me to go to the stats because there's a lot of really hard stats that we hear. More than 50,000 kids in our city go to mediocre or failing schools, regardless of the type of school, public, private, 50,000 kids of 100,000. We've got 14% of our high school graduates in Milwaukee that go on to get a 2 or 4 year degree. So if you step back and think about that, if you've got 100 freshmen, maybe 65%, 65 to 70%, so 65 of those students graduate high school. 9 of them get either a 2 or 4 year degree. So when I step back and think about things, we've got stats like the largest racial black-white achievement gap in the country in Milwaukee. We've got all of these failing schools. But when I step back and think about it, I think one of the biggest challenges is a lack of hope for our kids. We have a system that has failed their parents and in some cases their grandparents. And we have kids that don't see what's possible. But I get the privilege every day to work with kids, and our students are no different than the 100,000 students across Milwaukee. The difference is we give them a different chance. But our kids are looking for hope and opportunity, and behind every one of those numbers is a student, and there's stories that go with each of them. A lot of our students may come from single-parent homes. Many of our students come from poverty. Some are homeless. There are so many different challenges, but the really important thing to remember, regardless of where you live and regardless of where your kids are coming from, is that so many of our students have limitless potential that as a community, we're never giving them the chance to unpack. And that not only hurts them, but it hurts our whole community.
Without question, I just want to, first of all, listening to you answer that question, Abby, certainly there is a depressing aspect to this when we talk about some of the data. If we are sending our students to failing schools, we are not going to create that kind of opportunity that they need to have. So, that part of it certainly is a little bit depressing. But what I hear in your voice is a tremendous amount of optimism and positivity in terms of what can be and what the future could be for these students in Milwaukee. We do have in our city a huge racial divide, and there's a lot of people that are working on that. I grew up, I'm now in my mid-50s, spent my entire life here, and have seen the disparity in the city, and lots of people putting effort into trying to figure out how we solve for that. A huge part of solving for that is through education, of course, and by showing students you use words like hope and opportunity, and that there is a future for them if we put the right equation together and we do this the right way, which I know you're putting tremendous amount of effort into. And so I want to get into some of the solutions, but before we do that, and you touched on a few of these in your last answer, if I'm a student growing up in an urban environment, if I'm a student growing up in, particularly here in the city of Milwaukee, what are some of the unique challenges that you have in terms of educating those students that are coming from some of these backgrounds that may have been a little bit challenging?
Yeah, great question. If I step back and I think about the challenges that schools face, that parents face, that students face, there are a number of them that I could go into, but there are a couple that really rise to mind. In Milwaukee, actually, one of the things I'm most excited about is we have an abundance of choice for families. The Choice program in Wisconsin provides parents and students that are at or below a certain income threshold the ability to choose to take a voucher and go to a private school like Aug Prep. But part of the challenge is we have an abundance of choice, but we give our parents very little information, and there's not nearly enough quality choice options for our parents. And so that's, to me, one of the biggest challenges. It's an incredible opportunity, but in giving this opportunity, we've also got to make sure we give our parents good information so they can make the right decision for their own students and their own families.
Absolutely. The city of Milwaukee has been such an advocate and such a pioneer, really, in this whole space of school choice. I think back to names like Dr. Howard Fuller, literally decades ago, huge advocate for making sure that students and parents have choices, making sure that we put the student in the right environment that is proper for them, that if I am a parent, whether I'm a single parent, whether I'm I'm two parents that are trying to sort out what is best for my son or daughter, really being able to look at what are the unique needs of that student, what are the unique opportunities, what kind of a pathway do they want to be on, and then making sure that they have options. And I think the options part of it is really important. And I certainly don't want to send the message that we're not huge advocates for public education. I certainly am. I'm a product of it and had a great pathway, but providing different options and different choices, and then in some ways forcing people to look at the landscape and saying, if I am going to attract students to my school, I have to offer a certain experience for them. I have to offer certain outcomes and be able to stand on, whatever that platform is and say, look, if you attend this particular institution, these are the opportunities that are going to be provided to you. I know one of the things that we'll probably get into is success rates and graduation rates and so on. I want to, and you touched on the dropout rate as well, as far as the number of students that actually complete their education pathway in the school system here in the city of Milwaukee. But let's talk about, for those 35% of students that don't graduate, because I think that was the number if I do the inverse of your 65%. So over a third of students are not graduating from high school. What does the future look like for those students?
So it's hard. I mean, if you talk to, and as you talk to any CEOs in the workplace, and I have a background that is a mixture of corporate and education, and so I sat in the seat on the corporate side. For our students that don't get a high school diploma, the opportunities for meaningful and purposeful work become really limited. And I do think that that's when you start hitting those moments where we're seeing the abundance of crime in the city and a lot of different pieces happening. I think it's because we haven't equipped our students for meaningful work as they step out of. I don't think college is the perfect fit for all of our kids, 2 or 4 year, but how do we equip our students to have purposeful work, apprenticeships in the trades? There's so many different opportunities, but if they don't finish a high school diploma, it's a gateway for most employers in hiring.
Right.
But part of the reason it's a gateway is it should be, and unfortunately it's not always the case, it should be an indicator of preparation for the workforce for our kids. So missing out on that really inhibits not just the long-term life opportunities for our kids, but even those short-term opportunities for our kids and really pursuing something purposeful in life.
And that's really what it's all about, right? Is having a purpose in life, getting up and having a reason to do whatever work you're doing. How do we prepare them in a way that gives them the absolute best opportunity for success, however they define it. And that can be economic success. That can be success in terms of, what they do with their family. It can be success in terms of what they achieve in their career, but really having that hope, having that sense of purpose, really, really important. And I can hear that coming through in the conversation that we're having here, Abby. So now let's talk about that. So if we're going to upend the model of education a little bit, if we're going to try and reach some of these students that maybe didn't have these opportunities, what is Aug Prep specifically doing different?
When I stop and think about it, the first biggest piece of what we're doing is we start with a belief in the capability of every student. And as much as that sounds like it should be a non-starter, it's unfortunately not. And so everything from every team member we hire, our front office team, our facilities team, our teachers, our leaders, that belief has to be at the forefront of everything we do. But then I step back and I say it's the combination. So academic rigor has to be part of what we do. We are a school where I want to make sure every one of our high school seniors graduates being able to make the decision that's right for them that's next. If it is a college degree, they can afford it and they can continue on to go on to get a 4-year degree. It may be a 2-year degree. It may be an apprenticeship. That has to start with academic rigor all the way back when they're 4 years old. We purposefully and missionally actually increase our middle school grade level size so that it's an entry point for new students, and our high school grade level size, because when we have 95% of our students coming every year, we want to make sure new students get the opportunity as well.
So 95% come back every year? Is that
95% of our students come back every year. The academic rigor isn't enough. For us, we think about the power of the and. It's academic rigor and how do we serve the whole child? Serving the whole child includes deep options and opportunities in the arts, in athletics, in STEM, in college and career. We have a team of 8 social workers that work with our 1,800 kids at the school. So the academic rigor, we're a school. If we don't serve kids well, we're not doing our job. But we know we can't serve them the way we need to unless we have that power of the and with serving the whole child. And as a school, Aug Prep is a non-denominational Christian school. The faith component interweaves through all of that for us. And that's also another critical piece in who we are and how we serve our kids.
So academic rigor, serving the entire child, and certainly that faith component is part of what you're doing. And an important part is certainly in my view. So I like the way that you explain that and really helped us get a sense for this really is about the student, and this really is about every student being an individual. They all come from somewhere. That somewhere isn't the same. They've all got a little bit different background, and I want to talk about that here in a moment. But really focusing on the holistic approach for that student, and of course, with 95% of your students coming back every year, you're obviously doing something right. I want to highlight the fact that to make sure that point wasn't lost on our audience, expanding the number of students you're serving as they move through the education pathway, so that if I'm a student that maybe had a different K-8 experience or a different K-5 experience or what have you, I'm not precluded from taking advantage of the great things that are happening in Aug Prep. Let's talk about the communities that you're serving and however you define that, whether that's geographical, whether that's, some other demographic. Tell us about do you have a specific focus on specific communities?
Yeah, we do. Today, our campus is on the south side, but in a lot of ways, we serve the whole community. We have students coming from 43 zip codes across the area. I'm going to be honest, I didn't even realize there were 43 zip codes in this area. Yeah. But we have students coming from everywhere. About 80%, though, come from 4 zip codes right around the school. 92% of our students are Hispanic, but that Hispanic community has so many sub-communities and cultures and just within it. Our 3rd and 4th graders did a family tree project. And as part of just looking into their family history and learning about their families, the students asked their parents and their grandparents what countries they were born in. We put flags around the school for every country and had more than 35 flags up. So there's an incredible diversity, but we've continuously grown. We've got more and more Black students that come every year, more and more white students that come every year. But we purposefully are built and serving predominantly low-income students of color in Milwaukee, wanting to create an option for excellence for them. Now, what's really neat as I think about it is that we just purchased the Cardinal Stritch campus.
Right.
And our vision for that campus is actually thinking about one of the biggest challenges we face as we look at some of our graduates from our founding campus. And that vision will not only impact the new campus, but our existing campus. And our vision is to have a diverse campus. We have some extraordinary schools in Milwaukee. We have great MPS schools, great charter schools, great private schools. I am also a product of public education. But many of the great schools are singular, predominantly Hispanic, as in Aug Prep. Predominantly Black, St. Marcus is an extraordinary school on the north side. Predominantly Hmong, the Hmong American Peace Academy is a great school for our kids. And then if you look even further, you've got schools that are predominantly affluent. And often the great schools feel singular in one way or another. And what we're not doing in any of our schools like that is preparing our students for the real diverse world that's out there. And so the Cardinal Stritch campus is actually uniquely located in a way that we are hoping to create socioeconomic diversity, cultural diversity, and racial diversity that is really different than what we're doing on the South Side, but that we hope we can bring to the South Side as well.
For our listeners, and we have them, of course, all over the world and certainly all over the United States, who may not be as intimately familiar with the city of Milwaukee as you and I are. You mentioned a few things. Even when I was growing up in, this is now 30, 40 years ago, even back then, there was a pretty big cultural divide between the North Siders and the South Siders, right? And you knew based upon what kind of car somebody drove, literally how they talked. Even back then, you could tell whether somebody, by and large, whether somebody was a North Sider or a South Sider. And both of those, both the North Side and the South Side, have evolved significantly. And I think that's probably true for just about everybody. We're always more comfortable in people that we around people that are, quote, like us. And so creating these opportunities for people to intermingle, to understand that in so many ways we're way more the same than we are different. And then we should celebrate those areas where we're different. And so I think that diversity that you see both in your current campus, and I'm sure maybe in a different flavor, we'll talk about that in a bit, in the new Cardinal Stritch campus, is something that we should be celebrating, we should be excited about, and I think it's probably a big key to, among other things, the success of Aug Prep. And when you think about that success, Abby, I would love for you to share with us a little bit about, and you mentioned a few things. The academic rigor is certainly important, the working with the entire student and so on. If you were to take 4 or 5 things that you think are really unique about your approach to education and highlight those for our audience, what would you think should be on that list?
That when I stop and think about the 4 to 5 highlights of kind of what we're doing and the success we've had, one of them is our focus on what we call future ready. So we start with our kids and our parents as young as kindergarten. And in early elementary and in elementary, it's exposure to different careers and to colleges. Many of our kids don't come from that college background. In middle school, we start doing career exploration, and we call them I Can days, and we'll bring in, so within the construction industry, for example, we'll bring in 3 or 4 different companies, but then people across multiple careers within that industry. So when people think about the construction industry, they realize that there are hundreds of different opportunities that they can look at. We've done the same with the medical industry and partnered with Children's and some other partners to bring in different professionals. Often you think nurse or doctor. How do we create an awareness of all the different opportunities within the medical field, from technology to marketing to the medical side of things? And so middle school becomes a big career exploration time. It's also when opportunities start to open up for what we call pre-college and pre-career opportunities. So all of our high school students, but even some of our middle school students, participate in at least one pre-college program. And it's a safe, kind of low-risk way to try out a career you might be interested in and learn before you go pursue a 2-year degree or a master's degree.
Right.
Maybe realize you hate it and you don't want to do it.
For sure.
But maybe find a passion or even another career within the exposure that you decide you want to pursue. And that's one of the really big pieces that we've seen success. We've had 3 graduating classes. And our alum, the 257 graduates we've graduated so far, raised or earned more than $21 million in scholarships. So that work in and of itself is kind of a big success place. If I were to think about a second place, it'd be on the academic success. So I shared being a great school is core to who we are and how we are called to serve our kids. As a school, we are in our 7th school year this year, so we're still a baby when it comes to many schools. Not in size, because we've grown from nothing to 1,800 students. But our students and school for the last more than 3 years has been the top K-12 school in the state, or one of the top 2 K-12 schools in the state. Even though many of our students might come to us 3, 4, or even 5 years behind academically, our students are growing faster than 98% of the students in the state. And so for me, that second really big piece is our students are succeeding at high levels academically. They're growing faster than national averages, and they're showing that regardless of income, regardless of family background, regardless of circumstances, our students can succeed at the same high levels that I might expect of my own students or students that are in the suburbs. And I should put in, my own kids do come to school with me. And so I experience everything at Aug Prep, not only as an administrator, but also as a parent.
So I want to talk about the future ready thing in just a minute. But before we do that, because you really piqued my interest. I mean, when you talk about a student who might be several years behind academically coming to your institution, not only catching up, but then excelling, it's one thing, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but it's one thing to say, hey, academic rigor is important. It's another thing to be able to actually deliver on that promise and actually create that opportunity in that future for that student. So tell me a little bit more about that. I would guess that most schools would tell you that academic rigor is important. You're proving not only that it's important, but that the results are there. What's the difference?
Yeah, that's a great point. A couple different pieces go with that. One, having great teachers is the biggest impact on a student. So we focus a lot of work on mission-aligned hiring first, and then hiring great teachers from a competency standpoint. So hiring great staff is a critical part of what we do. But when you get into education speak a little bit, there's remediation and acceleration. Remediation would be looking at a student that's 3, 4, 5 years behind and remediating and kind of slowly trying to catch them up. Mm-hmm. With acceleration, we do work with those students that are behind. We do a lot of breaking our students into smaller groups. A student may be behind in reading, but ahead in math. How do we make sure we've got groups that can continue pushing a student that's already doing well in math further, but catching a student up in reading where they're both learning grade level content, but they're also catching up from where they are. And that's what acceleration is. It's making sure those students, even if they're coming in at a 3rd grade level in 5th grade, they're receiving 5th grade content while at the same time being caught up from 3rd grade to 5th grade. That takes really talented teachers. We are blessed to have an extraordinary classroom, but they're not Superman and Superwomen. They work really hard, but it is a matter, I've gone back to this a couple times, some of it's mindset, believing what kids are, what's possible for kids and what kids are capable of achieving. If you step into a classroom like that and say, oh, my kids are 3 years behind, you step in setting a low bar. And my experience is that when we set a high bar for our students, when we show them that we believe what they're capable of, they often blow us away. And when you set a low bar, they often don't even meet that low bar. Yep. Kids pick up really easily on whether or not you care and believe in them. And then it's our job to give them the tools to succeed.
Absolutely. It's really that power of the confidence, being able to see the dream and then knowing that opportunity is there for you to accomplish it. A lot of times when in some of the businesses that we run, people will be like, why do you have so many young people? Why, and it's like, because you can look a young person who's got very little work experience in the eye and say, this is my expectation. And they just don't know any better. And they're like, all right, if that's what's expected of me, if I go to somebody who's been in the workforce for 20 or 30 years, right away, they're going to be like, oh, these are all the reasons I can't work. Somebody that with almost less experience will say, well, it's worth a try, or they don't even know that is something that might be a challenge, and they will amaze you with what they're able to accomplish. It almost feels like the same philosophy where if you look a student in the eye, regardless of where they are academically, when they come to you and let them know that you believe in what they're capable of doing, let them know that there's a path, that they can see other students that have experienced the same thing, that have had the same level of success, all of a sudden they start to believe that that's true. And it's kind of like whatever the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve, and that's what happens. Is that a little bit of the magic there?
Absolutely. And it takes hard work. So
For
our
sure.
students do the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
And actually that's part of how we coach our teachers is if our teachers are standing in front and just talking at our kids, our students don't have to do the heavy lifting of thinking. And so we work to equip our teachers to put that heavy lifting on the students. Our students need to know that we believe in them. We're going to give them the toolkit to succeed. They've got to do the work. And so how do we inspire them to do the work? How do we encourage them to do the work? But at the end of the day, they've got to step into that. And I've really gotten to know our senior class this year. It's our first class of sixth graders when we launched as a school. It's a really special class. And there's a young man in this year's senior class. He's actually a fifth year senior. For students that need that extra year to finish, we provide that option. He totally failed. His name's Jimmy. He totally failed his freshman year and actually failed most of his sophomore year. If I'm candid, the reason the opportunity of Aug Prep continued for him is because of COVID, because we looked and we said, we're not failing any kids out. They might have to stay longer, but we're going to work with them. And Jimmy had some teachers and leaders look at him and say, you can do this. But most importantly, he looked at himself and said, I need to do something differently. He went from a 0.075 GPA, hard, right? I just got an email from Jimmy on Friday night. He had a 4.0. He's in his senior year this year. He's taking 2 dual enrollment college classes and pre-calc right now. And what's really special for me is he did that work. His email was titled Goal Achieved. And that's what we know is possible for kids. Jimmy's an amazing example, and Jimmy's example made me cry on Friday night when I got it. But Jimmy, we have hundreds of students just like Jimmy, and it's our job to make sure they're getting access to those great opportunities.
Yeah, and I can hear the emotion in your voice as you tell that story. And it's, in whatever endeavor we're in, when you have that moment, that experience where you're like, oh my goodness, I didn't do that. The student did that. Jimmy had to work at that. And then you think about, all the teachers, and I want to touch on that for a moment, because you talk about the incredible teachers that you have. I just came from a meeting and we listened to a presentation about the most in-demand careers over the course of the next 10 years. And number 2 was educators. And then you looked at the compensation level on the list of top 10, and the number 10 in terms of compensation was educators. So what we're saying is teachers and people working in and around education is going to be a huge, huge need for us across the United States over the course of the next 10 years of where we're paying people. They're at the absolute bottom of the top 10 list. And so highest need, least compensation. Your teachers have to be doing this for all kinds of reasons, but making $1 billion is probably not on the list. So talk a little bit about what attracts a teacher to Aug Prep and what that experience feels like for them once they're there.
That's a great point. I would be the first one to say I'd love to see all of our educators making a whole lot more money. Sure. They do extraordinarily challenging work every day. But I often say the work is never easy, or it's often not easy. It's always meaningful. And so I think many of our teachers go into the work because they care about our kids. And they want to make a difference. We can't take advantage of that. We do our best at Aug Prep to make sure we're competitively paying our teachers. I'd always love to pay them more. The balance is we actually raise funds beyond what we get from state funding to make sure we can provide that whole child work and support, and to make sure we can competitively pay our teachers. There's a balance between how do you make sure the revenue and the expenses match in a way to make sure the school is sustainable long-term financially. But when I step back and think about the teachers and why they do this work, I think and how what we look for, why they choose Aug Prep. I think our teachers choose Aug Prep because we try to create the same environment for our teachers that we do for our kids. So for our kids, we try to create an environment that has extraordinarily high expectations, but is surrounded by the love, support, and tools that they need to succeed. That's my job as CEO, is to make sure for the staff in the school, our expectations are really high. Yeah. I think it's one of the hardest places. You're going to work the hardest as a teacher or a team member at Aug Prep as you would in just about any other school anywhere in the country. But we also make sure that we surround our teachers with the support, the resources, and the tools to be successful, whether or not that's academic coaches, whether or not that's coaches for leaders, whether or not it's tools and toolkits to help equip them with best practices in the classroom. Our job is to make sure that the teachers in our school have that support to then be able to effectively provide the exact same thing for our kids that we're trying to provide for the adults.
They've got to feel incredibly supported. I want to touch really quickly on the concept of future ready, because you mentioned a couple of things as we were going through that. There was a study, and we've talked about it regularly on this podcast. It's almost 10 years ago now that it was done, but it was by Skills USA and the Manufacturing Institute, and they went out to 23,000 young people who had graduated from high school, and regardless of where they ended up after that, and they said, what influenced your career pathway? What was the number one influencer of your career pathway? And all the expected items were on the list. Parents, social media, friends, teachers, all these things. But the number one thing on the list, and it literally wasn't anywhere close, 3 times greater impact than anything else on the list, was a young person's experiences while they were going through middle school and high school. So it's, what was your interest? What did you get to experience? And then how did that influence your career pathway? And in talking about future ready, the other thing that's interesting, there's a gentleman by the name of Brad Thorpe at Hennepin Technical College in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, Minnesota, nearby, who did his master's thesis on what influenced the career paths of girls. And what he found was that girls will make decisions about a career pathway as early as middle school. And not that they're necessarily saying, I'm going to be fill in the blank. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a nurse, whatever. They're saying, well, engineering, that's a boy's job. Or in his words, manufacturing, that's a boy's job. I had somebody saying boy's job, girl's job. That term shouldn't even exist. Well, of course it shouldn't. But in the minds of some young people, it does. So talk a little bit about that. I mean, you're going all the way into middle school. You're creating career readiness, or at least career exposure experience for these students. Talk about those experiences, and then are there differences in terms of how boys and girls experience, through their own perception, those experiences, and how that influences where they may end up?
Yeah, well, as a parent of 2 daughters, I care a lot about my kids getting exposed to STEM in particular.
For sure.
My oldest daughter has played with Legos since she was probably 2 years old. Yeah. And I can't wait to see what she decides to do. But one of the things I think about a lot is she going to encounter at some point someone saying math or science or engineering isn't cool for a girl? And that's not okay. But it's also really fun to watch her love building robots with Legos or with kits that she gets. And how do we think about creating opportunities for all kids to get that? And I think that often, and careers is only one place it happens, we run into these stigmas of this is a career most men go into, or this is a career most women go into. I do think students learn differently. It's really important to have teachers that are aware of how our kids learn and can, even within the same classroom, realize a student that needs more visual learning versus a student that needs more audible learning, a student that needs to be really active, a student that needs a really quiet place. And I think what we've got to do a better job of as a culture is take the girls and boys out of it and recognize that we have young men and young women that span all of those. And how, as schools, it is part of the reason I think Aug Prep won't be the perfect place for every student. I want it to be a great place for any student we have. But there will be schools that are better fits for certain kids that we aren't the right fit for. It's part of the reason I'm such a big believer in options and choices for our parents. But how do we think about knowing that even in middle school, those paths start getting influenced? How do we create more opportunities for exposure? Whether or not it's field trips, going to see manufacturing companies. I was a girl that loved math and science growing up myself. I still think going to a manufacturing facility is one of the coolest things. It doesn't matter what they're making. Watching whether or not it's the robotics or the specialized skills that people on the shop floor might have to have. It's really cool to see how the stuff we use every day is made. How do we create those opportunities for our kids? It's hard, though, to take kids out of the learning environment all day. We don't want them to lose learning time at the same time. And so how do we balance getting them out and also bringing credible professionals. So for all the folks that are listening, as you think about your own skill set, how might you bring that to a school and share it with kids so that as things spark, maybe a smaller group gets to go to the workplace to go deeper rather than having 30 kids of which 5 are really interested.
That's part of your curriculum as well, right? Is that the experience is right in the classroom. You mentioned your daughter's fascination with Legos, but aside from the reading and the lecture and so on, give us a sense for some of the experiences your students have.
One of the things that I've learned, and I'll often hear parents say, my son or daughter just hates to read. Mm-hmm. Well, then the question is, what are they interested in? Because if they hate to read, but they love sports, get them some sports magazines, right? Because it's great for them to read. Then they can read about something they're interested in. When it comes to the school side of things, this is a great place where we don't do everything we do by ourselves. We have partnerships in every aspect of what we do to support the work that we do. One of the best examples I can give for this particular question is actually we've got a great partnership with Sharp Literacy, and Sharp Literacy comes in with our elementary students, and they've got a coding program, and so it's not just book and reading literacy. They're working with students on coding and they're creating projects. Last year, my daughter was part of a group and the problem they wanted to solve, I have a really bad allergy to onions. The problem the group decided to solve was creating a machine that you could put a camera over food and it could tell you whether or not you'd have an allergy.
Wow.
And they didn't create the actual machine, right, but they went through coding. Sure. They built a prototype. Yeah. They went through the process of asking questions. It was all done, in this case, through the Sharp Literacy process. And it was a really great way. I was listening to my daughter at the dinner table, connecting what she was learning in reading and math and in other places to what she was getting to practice then with Sharp. And it was really great. It's also a great place. We've got a great partnership that we're just getting launched with Lab Midwest, the MMAC, and the Bucyrus Foundation. We're one of 3 schools. All of our high school students, actually, in addition to 4 years of traditional science, take at least 3 years with a 4th-year option of STEM classes. They pick between computer science, engineering, or biomedical tracks, and we want them to go deep within those tracks. So we've got this partnership right now with the MMAC and Lab Midwest and the Bucyrus Foundation, where we're actually being able to bring in additional real-world prototypes into some robotics and engineering classes that we have, and hopefully expanding the offerings that we have both across our engineering and computer science options to bring in these real-world practices. Kids aren't just learning theory, but they're also putting that theory into practice in a real world way that they might find in the workforce right after they graduate.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I love that. I'm a little familiar with that program. Just for our audience, the partners, the MMAC is the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce, now led by Dale Koyanga, led until just recently by a gentleman by the name of Tim Sheehy, who is a Milwaukee icon. He's been in that role for decades and a truly passionate leader here in the state of Wisconsin and in southeast Wisconsin. The Bucyrus Foundation, of course, for our listeners who don't know, Bucyrus was a huge mining equipment company, still is, here in the city of Milwaukee, actually on the south side of Milwaukee, just south of the border, and was acquired, I'm going to say about 13 years ago, give or take, by Caterpillar. And at that time, for a significant amount of money, and then the company that was acquired created a foundation called the Bucyrus Foundation that is putting its treasure to work in making Milwaukee and southeast Wisconsin a better place. So great funding from and support from organizations like the 2 that you just mentioned to do exactly what you said, Abby, which is to bring these authentic advanced manufacturing, Industry 4.0 level experiences into the school, into the classroom, enable students to experience what is fluid power, what is electrical systems, what is a programmable logic controller, as we talk about Rockwell Automation right here in Milwaukee, and really bringing these hands-on authentic experiences into the classroom, into the labs, not because every student is going to go on to become a computer or a robot programmer rather, but for those that want to take one or 2 semesters of coursework and literally can graduate and go into industry with an industry recognized certification programming industrial robots. And when we talk about compensation, I mean, those are jobs that can start at $60,000 plus a year, literally right out of high school. So just a phenomenal example some of these hands-on experiences that your students are having. I love the conversation about this coding project, and didn't know you were allergic to onions. I'm glad I didn't bring an onion sandwich or anything into the studio with me. But just those hands-on learning experiences where you can take what you're understanding and learning in math and reading and science and so on, and then combine and apply that combination of learning into something that becomes real for the student that they can wrap their brain around. That's really, really important. Creates these great outcomes. And I want to hit on that here for just a moment. We started our conversation today with a whole conversation about data and talking about, some of the other education options that might be available for a student here in Southeast Wisconsin, and the success or lack of success of some of those options. Let's talk about the data. I mean, the one thing that stuck with me already is $21 million in scholarships that your students have earned in a school that's only 7 years old. I mean, that's a great data point. Are there other ones that you would point to that says, this is working, and how do you measure success, and how do you know that what you're doing in terms of accomplishing your mission is effective in terms of what you're measuring?
Yeah, we've got a lot of metrics. I have a business background, and so coming into the education world, I do blend what I'm trained in on I think of it as organizational development, and bringing my MBA into the education world. So we actually have a strategic plan. We have 5 key strategies that we work towards every year. Within each of those strategies, we have our foundational goal, but then sub-goals for every year. So on the academic side, Wisconsin has a rating system. DPI, our Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction's got a rating system. Our goal every year is to have a 5-star school. It's a top star. Every year that we've gotten report cards, we've had a 4 or 5-star school. That means we've significantly exceeded or exceeded expectation. That's a signal to our community, parents, donors, business partners, that we're serving kids well academically. But beneath that, we have all sorts of other indicators. We use the MAP assessment, which is a nationally normed assessment, to look at both proficiency and growth of our students, all sorts of metrics that hopefully drive towards that big goal. From a whole child standpoint, we've got all sorts of different metrics: arts, athletics, and faith development, our social work piece, school culture. But at the end of the day, our primary metric for that is our student attendance rate and our student return rate. All of those other pieces go into whether or not our parents are coming back. We have a 95% student return rate and about a 95% student attendance rate at a time where we're seeing articles all over the country about truancy rates going through the roof right now. 95% of our students every day, at least, are coming in. But that's core to who we are. On the team side, we don't do any of this work without a great team. Our key goal is to make sure at least 90% of our staff come back every year. And we've had a 90% just under, just over percent return rate every year. We can't do that work without it. And then on college and career, which we have separated, I think at some point it may become part of that whole child. That future ready work that we do, our goal is to make sure at least 85% of our students are pursuing 2 or 4-year degrees, the military or apprenticeships. We're actually in the high 90s. About 60% of our students are pursuing 4-year degrees. About another 30% are pursuing 2-year degrees. And then last year we had 5 young men decide to go into the Marines, and we're working more and more on how do we build partnerships with apprenticeship programs across the city and across the state, because again, not even a 2-year program is the right fit for all of our students. Some are just ready to go into the workforce. How do we equip them to connect what they're passionate about with what they're good at, with purposeful next steps, and trying to create as many opportunities as we can?
Yeah, there again, music to my ears when we think about whether it's a student going on to a 4-year degree program, and that's right for some students and right for some careers, but not all. And I appreciate the fact that clearly you recognize that. The going on to, again, here in our state, amazing technical colleges with all kinds of career pathways. Of course, the focus on the military side of things is huge. And then you're exactly right. I mean, we're in a day and age right now where if you get the right combination of learning and credentials in your secondary pathway, you can go direct to workforce and have an amazing career. And that's not a dead end. You can always extend your education while you're working. You can always decide to go back and pursue whether it's additional certifications or a 2 or 4 year degree after you get into the workforce. None of these are life choices, but just making sure that we create the exact right cadre, if you will, of opportunities for students.
But you're right. Those credentials, so even a high school diploma, if you've got those credentials, it opens doors to often higher paid, which is a big deal for families that predominantly come from poverty. Higher paid jobs right out of college or right out of high school, either of them, those credentials open up additional doors.
Just creating these incredible opportunities for students. Our time here is passing quickly. I got a couple more topics that I want to make sure that we hit on here with Abby Andrietsch, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Aug Prep. The next one is you shared a story earlier in the podcast, just a really touching one about a young man named Jimmy. Are there other stories that you want to highlight of students that have had just this amazing experience and that really kind of show the power of the kind of education and experiences they're having in Aug Prep?
Yeah, I could tell you stories all day. You've heard me share a lot of different numbers. Behind every number are students, and behind every student is a story. And so all of our students have different stories. I shared that we've got a really special senior class this year. Many started with us in 6th grade, our first year as a school. And it's fun because I've talked to several of them who have said, Miss, I got in a lot of trouble when I was in middle school. And those same young men are leading our culture this year as a school. This is the first year as a school. We're in our 7th year that I feel like I visibly watched the culture from being led by adults to really being owned and led by our students. And it's powerful to see. We've got an extraordinary group of young 17 and 18-year-old men and women, but it's actually cool. It's a lot of these young men that are just leaders at the school, but not only looking to see how that helps them. It's fun to watch them. They're lifting each other up, and they're looking at me and saying, how can we get access to younger classmen so that we can empower their leadership? Awesome. And they actually asked for time during chapel to be able to talk to all the kids. And I said, we could probably figure that out. But if you were a sophomore and one of these young men has an older brother who was one of our first graduates, he's at Madison today. I said, if Isaac stood up in front of you, in front of a whole group and said, you all need to lead as a school, what would you do? And he said, I don't know, probably not much. And I said, if Isaac sat down with you one-on-one and said, you are a leader in this school, how are you going to step up and lead? What would you do? And this young man, his name's Santana, stopped and paused and looked at me and said, Miss, I got a whole lot of meetings I got to do.
That's awesome.
We've got another young lady named Jacqueline. She was accepted into a program called the Thrive Scholars. It is a program that is extraordinarily hard to get into. She got a fully paid 6 weeks opportunity at Amherst this last summer and just got accepted with a full ride, including travel to and from home, which is key for our kids to get to go to Colgate College next year in New York.
Yeah.
And so here are these young men and women. They're exploring what they want to do. They're leading the school. They're thinking about how do they impact the next generation at the school. But when I stop and I listen to folks that are down on our country, down on education, honestly, the first thing I say is come visit, because I have so much hope for what's possible because of the young men and women that I get to work with and see every day. They're pretty extraordinary. And what's powerful to me is Aug Prep is a special place. I'm going to own that. But there are incredibly extraordinary young men and women all over Milwaukee and all over our country. And it's our job as adults to open the doors to opportunity for them.
And that's just a great way to characterize it, because first of all, I see the same thing, right? And I travel all over certainly the Midwest and all over the country on the STEM and technical education side. And you just see these students that are just these young men and women, boys and girls that have their whole life in front of them. We always hear about the failure stories and maybe the pathways that didn't end well. There's so many more in so many cases of students that are on the right path, that see a bright future ahead of them. And it really is just somebody saying, I believe in you, somebody saying that we're going to invest in you, that we're going to work with you to create the future that you deserve to have if you're willing to put the work and the effort and the time in on your own. To that point, investing in these students, we talked about the state voucher program, we talked about the funding. None of this happens without the tremendous generosity of the Ramirez family. We had Austin Ramirez from Husco on the podcast a couple of years ago to talk about his work on the manufacturing side. We'll link that up in the show notes, but that's the same family we're talking about. Talk about the incredible investment that the family is making in education and kind of how the pieces fit together, your role, Austin, Gus. I mean, let our listeners know a little bit about that.
Yeah, and full disclosure for the listeners, I am our founders, Gus and Becky's daughter. I am unexpectedly in my role, and I could not be more passionately in my role. So that's a story for another day. But I am part of the family that founded the school and that is seeking to expand the school's reach and impact in Milwaukee. I grew up with extraordinary parents. My mom was a teacher. My dad was an engineer that found his way quickly into the business world. They were middle class at best. When they got married, they lived off of you hear the stories, very little when they first got married right in college. I had the privilege of watching my dad grow a business, Husco, and Austin now runs that business. Tremendously successful. I got to watch as a child and then an adult. Leadership, I think at its best, values-driven leadership. Mm-hmm. And I grew up very much, instilled in me was the deep belief of to whom much is given, much is expected.
Yep, one of my favorite.
And
verses, by the way.
It is deeply faith-driven for us. God has blessed our family in many ways, and those blessings aren't ours. We can't take them to the grave. How do we use those blessings to impact the community? And my sister is a teacher. I have straddled the business world and education, and my brother's in the business world, using the success of Husco to really be able to do what we're doing at Aug Prep. And getting to be part of that has been really powerful and special.
Yeah, without question, and credit to your entire family, and everything that you just said I know is genuine, and as you know, I've been aware of and familiar with your family's company for now decade upon decade, probably 30 years, and watched it grow. Just a great success story, and then this whole idea of how are we going to take these blessings and really turn that around and say, what can we do for our community? And what we're learning today about Aug Prep and these 1,800 students and their lives, and by extension, all the other lives that they're going to change. It's got to be just a tremendously, tremendously rewarding. But the work isn't done. You mentioned Cardinal Stritch a little bit earlier in this discussion, Abby, and regrettably, Cardinal Stritch, for a variety of reasons, had to close its doors last April of 2022, give or take a month. My best friend has an MBA from Cardinal Stritch. I raised my family like 3 blocks, maybe 4 blocks away from Cardinal Stritch. We used to, we'd walk with our kids through the campus. I mean, so it's been a part of the fabric of what we call the North Shore of Milwaukee, and served literally a global group of students. So the sad news was in April when they said, hey, we're not able to make ends meet anymore. We've got to close the doors. The good news is that along comes Aug Prep and says, hey, there's a future for this space, there's a future for this campus, and we want to reach a new community of students by adding another campus to our great institution. So with that backdrop, talk a little bit about what's going on at Cardinal Stritch.
Yeah, so you have to know our founders to know the backdrop of that, because we weren't planning to have a second campus at the time. Gus, part of what led to Husco's success, and Austin leads with the same way, is Gus saw an opportunity and jumped on it. He did so with as much information as he could, but he stepped on that campus in June for the graduation event for a combination of the Boys and Girls Club's Grad Plus program and All in Milwaukee, which is an extraordinary partner for us, for students that go on to 4-year colleges in the area. And he looked around and said, this campus was built to be a school. He actually didn't know Cardinal Stritch that well, but as we got to know it, the values of Cardinal Stritch are so aligned with who we are at Aug Prep. And so he jumped on the opportunity. He pursued the purchase unexpectedly. Had to move things around to make it happen. We had some uncomfortable moments because we just opened a second building on our first campus in August. So I was amidst trying to make sure we could add 30% new students and staff in a strong and healthy way. And this opportunity has become an extraordinary one. So our South Campus over the next couple of years will grow to be about 2,400 students. With the addition of Andrietsch, we're looking at a launch in fall of 26. We'll be a K-12 school on the north side, but the location of Andrietsch, what makes it unique, is the location. So the location of Andrietsch creates an opportunity, we hope and believe, to create diversity in that campus, socioeconomically, racially, and culturally, that we haven't seen in many other places, connecting the more affluent suburbs of Milwaukee with the north side of Milwaukee, which is traditionally African American. And candidly, there are not enough great school options for our kids on the north side. So our hope and vision is, how do we bring that Christ-centered, high-quality, whole child-focused education to the north side and do it in a way that reflects the world that we want our kids to live in. Having our students that are Black, that are brown, that are white, that are poor, that are affluent in one place, valuing the beauty of each of them, but also growing in excellent ways. And we believe that's a critical part of developing the next generation of leaders for our community and our world.
I just think it's just phenomenal news. When in fact I emailed your brother within an hour, Austin, of seeing the press release that Aug Prep was acquiring it and saying, "Oh my goodness! I mean, this is phenomenal." And I know your family has deep roots in that that part of the city as well. So just really, really exciting future for you on that campus. Great for those students. Well, we're going to have you back one of these days in the future to tell us all about the things looking backwards once you get this new program launched in the fall of 26, is it? You said so 26, 27 school year will be upon us soon enough, and lots of work to do between now and then, but we'll look forward to reflecting on that. One more thing I want to reflect on before we call it an episode here on the Tech Ed Podcast with Abby is the question we love asking our guests here on the Tech Ed Podcast. We get some absolutely fascinating answers to this one. But that question is this. I mean, if we're going to go back in time, and let's say you're a sophomore in high school, if we were to go back in time to that 15-year-old Abby, at that time, Abby Ramirez, if you had to give one piece of advice to that young lady, what would that piece of advice be?
If I could only give myself one piece of advice, it would be to make sure you stop and celebrate the big and the small moments. I'm a workhorse. I get very passionate about what I do, but I also have to be reminded. I have to remind myself, and I'm fortunate to have people around me that help remind me, especially when so many great things are going on. Make sure you stop and celebrate those moments, see them for what they are, and let them inspire what might come next.
Absolutely. And we're first of all glad that you stopped and enjoyed some moments with us, celebrating those moments. And I like the fact that you say large and small, because in so many ways, it's those little wins and those little victories that we have in life that sometimes we fail to celebrate and don't give ourselves enough credit for all the great things that are happening as we journey through this thing we call human existence in life. And so we're glad you took some time to celebrate all the great successes that are happening at Aug Prep, Abby. Just absolutely amazing what you've been able to build. And I know it's not a sole effort on your part, but a team effort, what you and your team, large team, have been able to build over just 7 years, and looking forward to the next 7, to having you on again to talk about all the great things that you're doing. But really want to thank you for being with us today on the Tech Ed Podcast. Abby Andrietsch, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Aug Prep here in my hometown of Milwaukee. I think our listeners now know what a magical place that is, the incredible mission, the incredible work that you're doing. And we really appreciate you coming on and sharing a little bit about that work with us today.
Thanks for having me, Matt. It's been fun.
Wow. Now we know what can happen for all kinds of young people when we put their education first. What a great episode with Abby Andrietsch from Aug Prep. I absolutely love what they're doing there for so many young people, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. Lots and lots of things came up as we chatted with Abby. So check out the show notes and the links to the resources that were mentioned in this episode. To do that, you want to go to techedpodcast.com/augprep. That's techedpodcast.com/AUGPREP. I always love checking out our show notes. I know that you will too. They are the best in the business. Now, remember, we are always, every single week, active on social media, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on TikTok. We post all the time. We post about new episodes. We post about insights in technical education and incredible content. So find us on your favorite social media platform and say hello. We would absolutely love to connect with you. Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast, and we will see you all next week.